healthier community. He is a Taurus dog parent of 2 daughters, a stereotypical younger millennial, watches way too much TV, and has not eaten meat since 2007. And Dr. Tane Ward is our third speaker, is an organizer, author, and educator based in Austin, Texas. He has held a number of roles as a director, manager, facilitator, and trainer in various organizations and grassroots movement throughout North and South America. Currently, he works as an equity consultant. Tane earned his PhD in 2014 in anthropology from the University of Texas. He writes poetry, nonfiction, and fiction focused on mythology, mysticism, social justice, and indigenous knowledge. His first book, The Maze of Creation, An Alchemist's Guide to the Center, was published by Little Crow Press in 2019. Tane serves as vice president in Nasuro, serves on the board of Casa de Cultura, and manages Equilibrio, a decolonial organizing project. And hopefully Tane will be able to join us at the end, but we would love to introduce and have Dave Cortez start us off. Thanks for joining us, Dave.
Thank you, Mark, Darla, and Erica, and everybody. Good morning, everyone. Happy Earth Day. My name is Dave Cortez, he, him, his pronouns. Coming at you from the Sierra Club office over in North Austin, but I live in South Austin, which is like another world these days. But thank you so much, everyone, for your time and energy. Please feel free to drop thoughts or comments in the chat. You know, I just want to preface things first. I'm sorry I was unable to join and hear my dear friend Rocio speak this morning, and I hope many of you all were able to. Everything, the wisdom and the power in Rocio's words are very, we're very fortunate to have her and her experience shared all the time. So shout out there. I'm also stoked to hear what Andy has to say, and hopefully Tane can get in. But let me just preface again with, you know, everything in life is political. It doesn't mean it's about partisan politics. So, you know, what you drive or how you commute to work or school is a political action. What you eat is a political action. You know, who you support and how you show up in community is a political action. So some things you hear today in pictures you'll see, this is not about partisan politics or anything like that. This is, you know, in the spirit of Earth Day, reminding us that everything we do is political, and everything that we're going to hear about today is in that true spirit of Earth Day. Everything that we talk about today is connected to multiple struggles, to multiple experiences of folks that are living under a cascading just avalanche of oppression. So let's start. I'm going to share some screen. I hope that's okay. I do have some slides. And Mark or Starla, feel free to interrupt me at any time if there's some issues. So I'm going to go ahead and start sharing right now. All right, and get into the present. All right, everyone. So that's me. And there in that picture, there's a couple of thousand folks, totally organic, you know, not like big NGO funded, just like people put together a Facebook event and said, let's go oppose the DAPL, the Dakota Access Pipeline. Literally a couple thousand people showed up and decided we'd take them for a walk. And we carried our banners and walked down Congress Avenue, not really sure where to go, but we wanted to demonstrate. We wanted to oppose and speak out to the destruction of native land, the ongoing and continuing destruction of native land, and give folks a little taste of what it means to have their power back. Meaning maybe we didn't have permission to do everything we did, but we did it peacefully, we did it vocally, and it really gave folks a lot of energy to see that there's something else we can do in our lives beyond signing petitions, beyond just voting. And I'll elaborate more on that in a little bit. Then those are my friends. Andy, you might recognize a couple of them down at the bottom. All right. So first, before I go much further, I just want to acknowledge that we are, you probably did this morning, but I'm going to do it again. We are on occupied, unceded territory of many Native peoples. Specifically here in the Austin area, we've got land that was once the territory of the Tankawa and the Comanche, the Carrizo, the Coahuitecan, and many, many others. And no matter what part of the state or the country you're tuning in from today, no matter how long your family has been on that land, there's a good chance that it wasn't yours to begin with. And so we want to acknowledge that many people and many generations of folks have been where we're standing today before us. And we want to call in their spirit, call in the spirit of the land, and try and honor that what has happened for the last 100 years and 110, 150 years, 400 years, it's with us right now. And we have the power to shape what will be with us in the next 100, 110, 400 years ahead of us. And I want to note that with the CEER Club, there's always an opportunity for you to expand, to teach, to share and learn about the long legacy of colonization, the impact of colonization, especially as it pertains to the environmental, quote unquote, movement, which has historically been homogenous in terms of race, class, and gender, in who has access to, hiking, who has access to advocating in halls of power. And we have an ongoing program for folks to join. Again, it's in the spirit of popular education. If you want to help make the movement for climate justice and the environmental movement better center equity and anti-racism and anti-oppression, we'd love your help. And also, if you're looking to learn about these things and how it applies to things like the Barton Springs, or the lack of green space in East Austin, or the legacy of redlining and construction of highways, or the co-location of working class in poor communities of color near industrial facilities, we got you. So you can reach out to the CEER Club. I'll get you, you should have my email address, but we'll pop it in the chat too, so you can follow up. All right, let's do a quick little time check here. So again, we're not talking about partisan politics. Largely today is going to be about power. I'll read this quote in case you can't see it. Society is made up of groups. As long as the smaller groups do not have the same rights and same protection as others, I don't care whether you call it capitalism or communism, it is not going to work. Somehow the guys in power have to be reached by counter power, or through a change in their hearts and minds, or change will not come. And so I have this quote from Cesar Chavez, and example of two very powerful folks. On the right, Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton, former President Donald Trump, and then the insurrection that happened in Washington, D.C. on January 6th. You see a completely different execution and expression of power when you look at the farm workers movement, folks who absolutely had little to no agency at all other than their own time and energy, versus some very well organized wealth and influence, and how you can use that power. We have two very different examples of how power is demonstrated, shared, or not shared, or consolidated when we look at these two sets of folks. So let's talk a little bit about what power is. When it comes to advocacy and organizing and petitions and voting and things like that, I like to use this example. It's not a fancy graph, but it does get to some core concepts of the 4 levels of power. Most of what we do, signing that petition on change.org, turning your Facebook profile or your Instagram profile to something, Blackout Tuesday or whatever, it's going to fall on that top level. Your individual redress. I care about these things. Maybe on Earth Day, you use a tote bag, or you go to a fair, or you don't eat meat that one day. Individual actions, which all are important, but these are just isolated. Shifting to the second level of power, we're talking about, okay, maybe we will take some of those folks that did those things and try and expand composting in the city. So more people have composting. Great. It's there in front of them. Whether or not they're actually going to use it, whether or not they know what it is or how to use it, whether or not there's an equitable lens to it to make sure that they don't have an increase on their bills. That's not part of it. We're just expanding compost. So you get into the third level there, structural power. That's where we're actually trying to make sure, when you look back on the farm workers, Cesar Chavez, and in the Donald Trump photo that I was just sharing, we're getting into, okay, who actually has access to power and how are we using it? So this can be things like, we are taking folks who have no right to maybe vote at all, and trying to find ways for them to collectively pull their power together to strike and advocate for better wages. Therefore, you're expanding the playing field. On the other side, we see things like voting restrictions or redistricting, something that's going to shrink access to decision making. Very much that is what the third level of power is about. And we've seen a lot of that over the last 50 years, more towards the latter of shrinking access, not exactly expanding access. And there's even ways to distort statistics to argue that we've expanded voting access. Lastly, when we're getting into ethical and epistemic power, that's really what we're talking about today. We're talking about how we communicate and work with each other and the folks around us, our neighbors, the people across the hall in the apartment that maybe you wave at when you take the trash out, but you don't really know. Maybe, the folks at the coffee shop where you kind of pass by and you don't really know them. We're getting to a place where we outwardly and vocally begin to talk about the world that we want to see and the change that we want to be present in our lives and our communities. So one example right now that's kind of popular, people go to Starbucks and they use instead of giving their name, Starla, they say, Starla Union Yes Simmons, and then they might have a conversation. I like to give the example of being in the grocery store line. There's pre-pandemic, it's one of the best places to organize because you got somebody in front of you, you got somebody behind you, and you got the register. And if you're good, you can strike up a conversation with everybody about whatever it is you want. And hopefully it's about something that is for a better world. And we start to see these things in examples that we've seen this as, unfortunately right now, a lot of things are dubbed critical race theory. Heck, someone might call my presentation today critical race theory when it's not even close. When people are trying to shape a conversation with terminology that is used back on those other levels of power, they're using the terminology to shrink access. They're using it to create fear and division. We want to try and find ways to broaden, expand, to heal, and to welcome people into a conversation. I'll make sure that you all can get these slides at some point so you can you don't have to take a bunch of notes. But when we look back on social movements, especially in the 1960s, remember, we're celebrating Earth Day. 50 years ago, it was, all due respect to everything happening today and the folks working so hard on events, but it really wasn't about test driving electric vehicles or listening to a concert. Really, it was Earth Day was a byproduct of the uprisings in the 1960s of people who were very concerned about what was happening in their communities, but also happening in surrounding communities and people near them. It was rooted, the movements back then, the women's liberation movement, social justice movement, civil rights movements, farm workers movements, you name it, the Black Panthers and the SNCC, the folks that were working for generally just to help their communities and get their folks safety. It wasn't about violence. People were rooted in clear, accessible vision and values. It was more than just a moral cause. It was about a community vision. And it was very much about trying to lift people into leadership. Rosa Parks wasn't some one random person who cared. Rosa Parks was a member of a community of activists and organizers and ended up being the one that took the hit and got out there visibly. Social movements value leadership development. They value bringing people besides themselves into the work. You see diversity in all different forms and excuse me. and they're ready to, when a flashpoint is something when like, when George Floyd was murdered, or, we have a war start, and you see those are flashpoints. When communities of people are ready to mobilize ahead of those, we have great opportunity to deepen epistemic values, to talk about epistemic values, to talk about changing the playing field and who we bring into the work. So again, this isn't a political partisan thing. It's just an example of how power systems are shifting in Texas. Really, not going to get into the details on this. You can just look at the statistics. This is 2020 and 2022. You see the numbers changing, specifically around competitive districts. You look at the next one, you're going from 6 to 0. And these are completely arbitrary decisions. They're not based on census or other complicated calculating factors. It's really just about politics, partisan politics, when they do these things. And so you can just see how one group of people is making a decision to limit the ability of another group of people to be competitive or maybe win, take power. So let's speak about the people who are most burdened. That's really what we want to dig into today. If you're from the frontera like me, you know this story really well, that, oops, my screen had something pop up, apologies. You know the story really well, that we are living as fronterizas in intersecting crises. This is a sample from the Rio Grande Valley. We had a tropical storm hit. You have just rampant flooding, port infrastructure. You have a militarized border. You have no way for people living in flooding communities to be able to escape up the highway because there's a militarized border checkpoint where they're still going to check status despite the storm. You had COVID completely ravage South Texas, the Rio Grande Valley, and El Paso, where I'm from. And just immense poverty, some of the most poor counties in the country. And it's easy to politicize these things, partisan ways, because someone's going to try and take advantage and say, well, the people who've been in power didn't care about you. Maybe we'll care about you. Or no, those other people come and they don't really care about you. We just really care about you. When in fact, there's not been investment in folks getting in. I mean, there's been some, but not enough investment in people being empowered to make their own decisions, to chart their own vision, to find and demand ways for all elected officials to serve their needs. Because this here that we're looking at is the status quo. Let me move us on a little faster here. So another example here would be, please feel free to put in the chat. I'm having trouble seeing it, but you can share with the room here, your experience in the winter storm. You heard a little bit about mine. This is just an example of what we went through and who profited off of it. Something we cannot ever forget. Some people remember Pearl Harbor and D-Day. They remember just horrific moments in history. Well, for me, this is something as a longtime multi-generational Texan who's been working with frontline communities will never forget, and will never stop trying to make sure that the needs of those on the margins are addressed, served, and those who stop it or trying to stop serving the needs of those on the margins are challenged to do better. So, just think back on it and feel free to put in the chat, what was your experience like in that winter storm? Did you lose power? Were you trapped? Like my family, we couldn't get out of the neighborhood because we were surrounded by hills with no vehicle that could make it out. This young man in Conroe who died of hypothermia, the number of people in Houston who, just wanted to survive and burned furniture, but, ran the gas stove and died from carbon monoxide poisoning in record levels. That didn't happen to everybody. It happened more to certain folks than others. And that is a hallmark of what we're dealing with climate change. I don't want to assume that everybody's on the same page with these, so I'll walk through these quickly. The disproportionate impact of the communities that we've talked about thus far on the Valley, folks in the winter storm, children, especially in the Dallas area. If you've lived in Dallas, like my old colleague Sherelle Blazer has said, if you've lived there, if you're 25 years old, you've never breathed legally clean air because of the smog and ozone pollution that is present in the community. Has been so thick for that long that technically, according to the Clean Air Act, it doesn't meet clean standards. And so little children like Isaiah here with the respirator on his face at 2 years old had to be hospitalized. Other children and families here struggling because their apartments or landlords had failed to improve the insulation and the weatherization in their homes. They had no agency, they had nowhere to turn and just had to try and do everything they could to survive. Meanwhile, other people who are responsible get away scot-free. They protect and benefit themselves. So let's dig into this a little deeper. When you're out in the community and you're trying to talk to people about climate change, or you're trying to talk about your work or any part of environmental justice, we have to be cognizant of the multiple layers of concern and oppression that people are dealing with on the daily, whether it's access to health insurance, access to quality education, even getting someone to work or to school. As we've learned a lot, I've learned a lot in the last 4 years, childcare, like being able to have someone look after your child, or if they're sick and not lose your job. Just like how critical these things are, being able to get more than FMLA if you have a kid and actually get paid parental leave for 12 weeks is a start. We should be doing what many other countries do, which is multiple months to get a chance to bond with your child. But we're also looking at deeper systemic problems like white supremacy, like patriarchy, economic systems like capitalism that force us into these situations where things like childcare and poverty are like forcing us to decide, do we do this or that, even though they're both critical to our survival. So as we're going out and trying to talk about whatever it is we're talking about, like getting people registered to vote or trying to expand solar energy or whatever it is, we need to always be cognizant of the community that we're engaging and how these multiple tentacles here are present in folks' lives. Typically, folks just refer to these, my colleague Shane Johnson helped put these together. Thank you, Shane. Typically, folks just refer to these as social justice issues, okay? But my job and other folks' job in the climate movement is to really drive home that this isn't just like checking a box. This is the lived experience of everybody in our communities and where we come from. And our folks in that system of power chart that I was showing you, we are way down at the bottom, and we have so much less ability because it's been taken from us to change the dynamics and change systems of power in the state. So I'll tell you a little bit here about my story. And then I think I need to get handing off to Andy pretty soon. So back to the Frontera. Okay, many years ago in the Bracero program, you couldn't cross the border unless you were sprayed with chemicals because those in power thought we were dirty Mexicans, or my ancestors were dirty Mexicans, and they had to spray us down before we could even get across. We were watching our families and relatives put into cages or prevented from entering the country. We were watching as terrorists decided to pick on us and murder us. And this example of the shooter who drove from suburban Dallas to my community and just picked people off for no other reason than hatred in a Walmart. That tower of death on the bottom right, Sarco, we lived under that for 110 years in El Paso, raining cadmium, arsenic, lead, other heavy metals. All of these things happen simultaneously. And we are asking people to do maybe one thing at that top layer: get out and vote, go do something about it. How does that really respond to what you're looking at right now? There's so much more that's needed, right? And if we're going to be effective in talking to people to work them listen to them, honor them, and move them to a place of more civic engagement and more community and collaboration. Like these folks here, I'm sorry, I'm pointing at my screen, but the folks here on the top left, part of the binational coalition we had against that Asarco copper smelter. If we're going to get them there, we need to deploy all of these things that we've been talking about today and be cognizant of what folks are wrangling with. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit here. I wanted to show a video. Let's see, but we'll stop here for just a second. I want folks to think about, we're not going to do a breakout or anything like that. I meant to take that top part off. Just about storytelling. So as we're talking about climate justice, environmental racism, and we're trying to change the world, what can we do to shift the narrative? This is an example from the Climate Justice Alliance. In order to shift the dominant culture and change structural power relationships, we need to change stories that just normalize unjust power structures and make change imaginable, real, possible, even if it might not happen tomorrow or today, maybe even not in a year. So I want you all to consider that as you do, work through your education, as you think about getting out into the community and organizing or advocating or just doing your jobs, how can you broaden the narrative of what we're trying to accomplish? One, we're trying to serve and support, but also what are we working towards on the bigger scale? And I'll leave you with this one. I think you all have probably heard this quote many times, but this, I think, encapsulates everything I'm trying to drive home here. We're living multi-issue lives. Whatever it is that whatever your economic status, whatever you're working on, we are struggling in many different ways, many invisible ways, some visible. And it's important that as we do that, we are working across constituencies, not just more environmental groups, not just more social justice groups, but that person across the hall in your apartment complex, the person in the grocery store line in front of you and behind you, the barista that you're getting your coffee from, wherever it is. We always have an opportunity to talk to people about what's happening around us in the world that we want to build. So I'm going to pause there, make sure that there's time for my compañeros to share their words.
Thank you so much, Dave. Andy, take the floor.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dave. I feel like what I'm going to share is going to build a lot off of what you talked about and raised and just complement it. So I'm really happy to be here, y'all. You can see like my UT stuff over here. But yes, I'm a proud alum, so it's really nice to be in this space with y'all, and I really appreciate the invitation and the offer. So I wanted to share a little bit more about myself, and part of why I think that's important is because for me, one of my biggest learnings in life is that the personal is political. And if there's anything that you can learn from what I want to share to you, it's that everything we do is inherently political and has an impact. And so for me, in my intro said, I was born and raised in the suburbs of Houston, specifically the Cypress area. But I found out in my adult life that it's actually like an unincorporated area. So I can't even vote for the mayor. So that kind of sucks. But my family's from the Rio Grande Valley, specifically Rio Grande City, Escobar, Roma, Texas, like super small towns along the border. In high school, I was really super involved in our environmental club. At one point, I was like the VP or something. And I just remember always getting picked on for like always ranting about climate catastrophe. Ever since I was 14, which is like when I first stopped eating meat. And I was like, meat's gonna destroy the planet, y'all. And they're like, shut up, you're 14. And I'm still the same way. Later in my life, I found out actually that I grew up on a Superfund site. And I'm gonna go into that a little bit more in another slide. But for me, that has had a very personal sort of drive for why this work is so important to me, because my family has been directly impacted by these issues. And yeah, in case you haven't like picked up on it, like I love organizing and I love fighting against depression. I live and breathe it, and that's what I'm here for. I wanted to share with y'all my kids, my dogs. These are my daughters, as I call them, Bina and Sirena. Just wanted to share something like cute and fun, and just show y'all like some of what my chosen family looks like. I think it's really important to recognize our non-human relatives, and that's part of pushing back against the idea that like humans are superior to all other species, because we really do require all of ourselves to be here, and all the species we share the planet with. So I mentioned I grew up on a Superfund site. So this is literally like right in front of my house. My house is on one of these streets, and there was Bell Cleaners that had been in the shopping center right across the road from my home that was open from 1988 into 2002. So 14 years where it was dumping their dry cleaning fluids and their chemicals and stuff. And it actually like leaked into my neighborhood's private water systems. And all of a sudden, like we had to like just get our own private like filter and our own private well. It was just this whole drama, and I never really understood it. Like I was like maybe like 12 and 11 when all this stuff was happening. And now after the fact, you know, I'm really happy, but also sad to say that both of my parents are cancer survivors. My dad had oral cancer and my mom had breast cancer, and they're not very old. My mom is about to be 48 and my dad's like 59. So, you know, it's pretty remarkable. And I just don't think that those things are not connected, right? So this is just really personal to me and why this is so important. So I wanted to share with you a little bit about CEER, the folks that I'm representing. We're the Coalition for Environment, Equity, and Resilience. Our mission is to raise awareness of the connections between pollution, place, and the public's health. We envision a region that is equitable, environmentally sustainable, and economically strong, where residents have the opportunity to live, work, learn, play, and pray free from environmental hazards. To make that vision a reality, we advocate for public and private investment in protecting communities by cleaning up hazards that contaminate our air, water, and land, while at the same time prevent or reduce flooding. CEER came about actually after Hurricane Harvey, which is when a whole bunch of organizations came together and they were like, we need to do something about this. Like, this isn't cool. And I'll kind of go into a little bit more about our member organizations. But some of the values that guide our work are, you know, that the community that we work with are the experts, right? It's a bottom-up organizing approach. Like we really work with community to sort of decide like how the work is led and what we're being worked on. And we really recognize that lived experience is data, and innovation requires diversity of thought. And we really push for people over profits. And not only that, but we have to understand history to understand the present so that we can imagine the future. CEER works across 5 counties. So we work in Harris County, and we also do work in Brazoria, Fort Bend, Liberty, and Jefferson counties, which are counties that surround Harris, that were selected based off of a long survey process. Originally, it was like 9 counties, excuse me, that were surveyed and assessed. And ultimately, they decided to focus on these 5 counties. And I'll go a little bit more into that in just a sec. So these are the campaigns that CEER is currently running. We have 3 of them. We have the first one, which is the Climate Justice Campaign, and that focuses specifically on movement building, capacity building, and leading and leadership development of neighborhood leaders to advance their vision of climate justice. So this campaign is specifically focused in the city of Houston, and there's a team of climate ambassadors who are community members throughout Houston that are paid stipends to do climate advocacy work. And it's a really amazing program that my colleague Carmen Cabeza oversees, and she's doing some super amazing work with those folks. Then our second campaign is the Harris Thrives campaign. And it exists because flooding is one of the most urgent climate issues for Houston. And like I said, since Hurricane Harvey, Harris County has really dealt with a lot of other flood risks, which obviously are affecting low income and communities of color disproportionately. And lastly, our third campaign is the Regional Resilience Campaign, which is the one that I am organizing with. And this is the one that really focuses across the 5 counties, but really more so the other 4 than Harris. And we work to ensure equitable recovery for all, as well as the development of strategy and engagement that involves environmental justice. So that way folks can start connecting like public health, flooding, the climate change, and how it connects to our 8-point plan. And what's the 8-point plan, you ask? Well, this is it. When the organizations that came together after Hurricane Harvey in 2017, they decided to set this platform together essentially to lead the work of our coalition. And I'm just going to read them out loud. But if you click on the link here, which we will share out these slides, you can go to our PDF that really lays out in more detail each of these 8 points. So the first one is to embrace transparency. The second one is to focus on our land, focus on our air, focus on our water, focus on resource recovery and recycling, focus on displaced people, embrace resiliency, and focus on equity. So those are the points that we really use to sort of guide the work and the campaigns that we decide to go off of. And I just wanted to include some of the really cool illustrations that we have, so we have some fun images instead of just a whole bunch of words. So like I said, we are a huge coalition. We are a coalition currently of 27 organizations. I'm not going to list them all out, but they're all listed here. This is the first 14 of them. They're organizations that work across Texas. Some of them are specific to Houston. Some of them work along the Gulf. Just really incredible, nonprofit members that are showing up and doing this work in different ways. Here's the rest of them. One of the things that's really important to highlight about our membership is that it really merges and marries these 2 sort of nonprofit spheres that weren't necessarily like coming together, which is, the traditional sort of like very scientific, usually white-led environmental organizations, and, the grassroots community, usually, BIPOC, marginalized folk led, and really bringing all those groups together to work on these things collectively and really build an environmental justice campaign and movement in Houston that really unites us. So that's a little bit about CEER. So I wanted to talk about some of the environmental harms, right, and how it affects people's healths. So I have some really great slides in here from one of our partners that I'll go into, but I just really wanted to just sound the alarm, right, that the entire population basically is breathing air that is, considered healthy, right? Like 99% of us are breathing in air that is really bad for our health. When I read that, I just sort of like, my jaw dropped. And I feel like it's something that it's probably really easy for us to brush off, but it I think should light a fire, right? To really push us to question, why do we have such dirty air? I mean, it's pretty clear fossil fuels are the culprit. But this information is from the World Health Organization that I pulled, but we're breathing in so many things that are just so bad for us, and small particulates, and particularly low and middle income countries are suffering the worst exposures. And Houston is just like not cute when it comes to air quality. We really breathe dirty air in Houston. So these are the slides from one of our member organizations, Air Alliance Houston. I really wanted to pull this because it's really alarming what their data has shown, right? The life expectancy throughout Houston, according to some zip codes, there are some zip codes in Houston, the same city, right? You just drive like 30 minutes down the road. There are people who live 23 years longer than folks in another zip code. And that's absurd and inexcusable, but also we know why. And it's not a coincidence that those lower life expectancies are people of color, primarily Black folks and Latinx folks, and people who don't have a lot of money, disabled folks, right? Like these are the people who are being harmed the most by what's happening. And these are the environmental harms, right? So when we look at the patterns of the pollutants, it really coincides with where there's high cancer, where there's issues of like asthma and breathing, and where we know that the ozone is particularly messy. So, there's just so much that really, just proves what we're trying to say here, which is that, those of us who are most exposed and disadvantaged are the ones who are going to be bearing the brunt of this and are currently bearing the brunt of this. So Houston leads the nation in air pollution. I was floored when I saw this. I thought surely like, New York or LA has got to be worse, but we're actually worse. And I mean, as a Houstonian, it wasn't something that I didn't really know it until I saw these slides personally. And it's, again, one of those things where I'm like, we've got to sound the alarm. It's no coincidence that Houston is also the energy capital of the country, and therefore one of the energy capitals of the world, right? Like, we have so many of these fossil fuel companies operating from this city and our coasts and our ports and stuff. And so we really have to do a lot of work on building power here in Houston to fight against that, because we truly are ground zero. And if only our skyline was clean like this on a normal day. One of the other things is water, right? It's really easy for us to forget that so many people don't even have access to clean water. There's so many areas across our state where we know that the water is undrinkable, where they say, don't drink the tap water, drink the water from the water bottles. And why is this okay? Like, it's absolutely not, right? Like, we're still in the era of Flint and of indigenous and native tribal lands that have dirty, nasty water. This is inexcusable. And even when sometimes water has been deemed safe, right? They're like the state and federal levels have been met or exceeded and it's all good. Like, people are still scared to drink the water because it smells or it's weird and it has these weird odors and stuff. And, I just included some of this accounts from a report that came out in February of this year of people in inner city Houston, areas like River Oaks, Galleria, like really like people you think are like more like privileged and have more money, are also experiencing this nasty water. So it's really affecting all of us, and it's absurd. Cute picture, right? Again, I really wanted to talk about some of the ways that the natural disasters have really impacted our communities. In case you didn't know, there are folks still to this day, you know, April 22nd, 2022, who are still dealing with the aftermath of Hurricane Harvey that happened in August of 2017, right? Like, absurd. People are still dealing with jumping through loopholes to get money to fix their homes up. And there's just so much that people are still dealing with because of loopholes that make it really hard for low income and people who frankly don't understand all these administrative processes to get through. And there's not a lot of support out there to get them to make sure that their applications are in on time and that they're not missing anything. Like, there's a lot that has to be done to support these folks and really minimize a lot of these barriers that end up just being administrative and hierarchical in nature. One of the things too that's really important is that we still have a lot of folks in our communities that have issues with literacy. And in conjunction with that, we have folks that are monolingual Spanish speakers, even Vietnamese, Arabic, speakers. And so we have a lot of work to do to really build on language justice, to include all these folks in our work. And we're not perfect at it and we're not doing the best, but we can always do better, right? And one of the other things that I've really noticed in working with our folks, particularly with the Regional Resilience Campaign, is that after these disasters, there's like the disaster capitalism that happens, where insurance companies and developers just really prey on these people who have been displaced. One of the community members that I work really closely with out of Fort Bend, she was displaced from her home for well over a year, and her insurance company was putting her up in all these absurd hotels. And eventually, after like, I think it was like 6 months of putting her in these hotels, they told her that they had spent like an absurd amount of money, that they had met their limit, that they weren't going to support her anymore. And she was like, how did you spend all that money and you didn't put me in an apartment that would have been a fraction of that, right? Like, they were abusing her, you know, insurance system to just like soak up all this money from her. And afterwards she had nowhere to go. And so she was bouncing from relatives' homes because she couldn't go back to her home because it was still damaged from Hurricane Harvey and then the winter storm, right? And not only that, should the developers that she hired to come work on her home ended up just totally doing a bad job, doing damage to some of the stuff that wasn't damaged, and ended up just walking off the job, right? So there's a lot of issues where people are being targeted after they're dealing with this trauma. And this is all happening still, right? So one of the other things that I wanted to connect as far as health, right, is mental health. And I know that Dave touched on this, but it's so incredibly important for us to identify the ways in which anguish and stress, trauma and anxiety have effects on the body and can even do physical effects on the body. Right, the community leader that I was talking about earlier, the one who was displaced, she suffered a stroke as a result of all that she was carrying from all of this. And so she's still dealing with the healing from that, right? And young people, I think right now, in particular, millennials like myself and Gen Z folk are dealing with this sense of like helplessness, where it's like the bearer of the weight of the unknown, and it creates like an eco-anxiety or climate anxiety that I think needs to be identified more and named more and given more space to, because it's all around us and it's happening. And we know that people who are more at risk to these issues are going to be more impacted by PTSD and behavioral problems and all these other issues that are disproportionate and have a direct connection to the climate crisis that we're dealing with. And I wanted to touch more on building power, kind of like what Dave was sharing. One of the things that I really think is powerful in activating and organizing folks is to always remind them and really start from a place of their inherent value, right? When I interned in New York City, I was working with trans and gender nonconforming folks. And one of the biggest lessons that I took away from them is the value of no one is disposable. And with that value, I have really tried to approach so much of our work and reminding everyone that we're working with that they're valuable, that they're not disposable, that their dreams and their struggles and their flaws are all important. And you know, part of that is self-determination. And that's just a fancy way, I think, of saying like being able to know who you are. And when you know who you are, you're able to become your best self. And I believe that with knowing your worth, having your self-determination, it inherently lends itself into building democracy and valuing democratic principles, right? Because democracy is about our voice, our individual, right, like voice of the many, but so many of us are so disenchanted and disenfranchised that you know, we don't see the value in ourselves nor the value in our voice. And so, you know, I think part of what Dave was also raising is the different forms of democracy, right? There's democracy in electoral politics, but democracy in the workplace, right? Like pushing for unions, that was so big, you know, generations ago. And workers having a voice in the workplace is so important, right? If they're spending 40 hours of their week in a place where they have no voice, what does that mean? Right? Democracy in our healthcare, having choice and agency and the quality of healthcare that we can get. And just democracy in the distribution of our resources. Like this is all fundamentally connected, and it's time for us to build that power. Cute pictures. I'm gonna stop there.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Andy and Dave. Y'all covered so much ground, such important topics. Or let me turn on my video, hold on. Our third panelist, Dr. Tane Ward, is in transit. He should be online and ready to go in about 10 minutes. So we wanted to take this time, this next 10 minutes, to open it up to Q&A. And for Dave or Andy, you can pose your question in the chat, or you can unmute yourself and just ask. I think we can handle that as well. It's not too many people. And feel free to ask it directly to Dave or Andy, or just open-ended, and either one of them can take a shot at it. And first of all, I wanted we would usually clap in person, so we're all collectively clapping for y'all. Don't be shy, y'all. There's a lot of no question's a bad question. Well, usually, but.
I'm curious to hear if anybody out there is like, you know, in your studies and in post studies, post-school studies, are you thinking about doing this kind of work? Or it doesn't even have to be about this. I mean, everything we've talked about applies across the spectrum of issues. You know, you could be talking about reproductive rights or housing. So if anybody's out there going into some of the work or wants to, feel free to speak up and share with us.
Hey, Dave, this is Starla.
Hey.
Thank you both so much. I was just thinking about, as you're speaking, and this is probably a self-fulfilling social work plug, but I mean, I think one of my biggest hopes is that social work students really look at some of these jobs that are traditionally like in environmental justice or working around climate justice as places where they should be. So I'm just curious, how often are you collaborating or working with social workers? I'm just kind of curious about sort of the community of people that are involved in your work, and are you like working with social workers? Do you
Yeah,
think it's out there?
briefly. I mean, I'm in a big fancy office these days, so I don't really
That's
get,
true.
or working from home. Y'all, there are not enough folks trained in social work, so in sociology, in instructional design. I mean, the list goes on. There are not enough, period, but especially in the climate and environmental communities. You get a lot of policy folks, you get a lot of attorneys, all needed, good people.
We have enough.
Yeah, we're good. It's like the no homers club from The Simpsons. We already got a homer here. We need some more social workers, and folks just trained in that background. And really some of the best organizers, wink, wink, hint, hint at who I'm looking at on the screen right now, Andy, have been through social work training, through programs in social work, social, that kind of studies. It's really valuable. I wish I had been through some of that. I don't know if you want to elaborate, Andy.
Yeah, I echo what you said. I don't know of folks with social work backgrounds that I'm working with explicitly, unfortunately. And I think one of the critical needs, like I was highlighting in what I was sharing, is this mental health part, right? So I guess I'm speaking specifically to the clinical social workers, but so many of our folks are in need of those conversations that are connecting and piecing together their trauma in relation to the catastrophe of losing your home or being displaced or the winter storm. I mean, can't highlight enough, right? We all know hundreds of people died from that, and that's just inexcusable. And we need the focus on healing from that. And I think that that's a really important role that social workers can do.
Thank you. I feel like that was like the plug that I needed, is because I feel like social workers are often at the intersection of every issue around living, being alive, and that we can be at this table around climate justice because we're already doing some of that work. So thank you.
Yeah. I'll just double down briefly. There's an emerging, it's called a table. Think of a table as a coalition called Texas for All. It's got a lot of progressive organizations and community organizations, and things like that. And I say progressive in not in the political partisan way. And they're looking, people opt for like polling and messaging studies instead of just like talking to the folks who, engage with other struggling humans. And so there's opportunity that they're shifting now towards more of that, like trying to get input from y'all, and I mean, I've known many social workers, and what you're facing in your work is incredible, and what the folks in their lives are facing is incredible. And these are the folks on the margins, and these are the folks that we need to serve. And I can only say so much. You all have way more agency than I do in your power and your voice and your story.
And I posted for any social workers out there looking for work, there are 3 community organizing jobs available currently at BASTA Austin, and that's where Andy used to work and learned a lot of their organizing skills. So anyone on the job market, check out the link to BASTA. They do tenant rights organizing in Austin to advocate for people to stay in their homes and fight off evictions, among other things.
Mark, I see there's a question.
Just a quick comment.
Go ahead.
Oh yeah, did someone want to make a?
Yeah, it is important for social workers to jump in. I think I was looking for opportunities to do my internship with environmental organizations and things like that. There was none really much opportunity to do it, and I believe that is strong and needed. Not as a social worker, not just a clinical social work, but as an organization, activism, and all that kind of stuff. I think it's very important. And for me, it was like I couldn't see nothing that aligned with it. And my goal is to do environmental social work. So I think it's important that we start open up and the school, and saying we need more to focus on other things. And I know clinical is important, but also I believe that if we don't do and act on environmental issues, what is the work of doing clinical if we're not going to have a planet to do our work? So I think it's very important to kind of emphasize that not just as organizations, but open opportunity for social workers to do internships and this organizations, and try to see if we can collaborate in a sense that to open more doors for social workers. And also from our side as the students, start bringing up those conversations. We need those opportunities. We need to expand our wins. We cannot just concentrate on this when we know that there's bigger issues to address in order for people to be okay. It's just, I think it's very important conversations that we have to bring to the table. And I was just on the table with Mark last night.
Yeah. Hey, Sandy. I'm so glad you could join us. Yeah.
Absolutely. There's room for all of us. We all have a place, right?
Yeah, it's important to bring awareness of I have worked with Brave. I have worked with different organizations, I personally met with Susana Mensa too, Rumpo there. So I know that there's a lot of people doing the work, and then sometimes I think it's just it's hard to navigate those doors. I think there have to be more openness about people jumping in, because at the end this is an issue that is, if we don't address it, it's gonna go farther and damage not just the people but all of us, our planet. So I think it's very conscious of us to start doing that and opening doors for other people to jump in and educate other people about these issues. And I just believe that I also personally work with a low income community, and I know the struggles that we did on the winter storm, and it was just like a little piece, just a crumble of it. I can imagine all the people, that I had to go through so many things for that, and even though that I didn't have no water or things like that, I couldn't move from my house, but it's still, I was able to survive that. So I just believe that it's very important for us to start bringing those conversations, that we need those doors to be open. And also, as organizations, our organizers need to start bringing people in and asking, hey, we need more help. We need social workers. We need them collaboration. We need them to focus also on these issues. And I think, asking, like we said, what can they say? No, or
Well, thank you so much for sharing that. I know we have Tane here. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening.
Awesome. No, thank you, Sandy, and thank you, everyone. Dr. Tane Ward is now with us, so he's going to hop on and give Tane, maybe talk for about 10 minutes, and then we can have 5 minutes for questions. So we'll just go over a little bit our time. Feel free if you need to get move away, start your lunch hour. That's fine. But Tane will speak for about 10 minutes, and then we'll have about 5 minutes left to ask him any additional questions. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Can you all hear me, Mark?
Yeah, sounds great.
Excellent. What a wonderful discussion to be coming into. And now, while I wasn't able to speak, I did hear those presentations, and I've been hearing this discussion, and it's fantastic, and I'm grateful to be a part of it. So thank you very much. I think this is an amazing question that was asked by Starla in terms of the collaboration that exists amongst different types of people doing different types of work. And I think that a good story that I will tell is after Harvey, I was in Houston area, and I was meeting with a social worker there who had been just come from meeting with a woman who had 3 children. She was undocumented. the apartment that she was staying in was heavily damaged by the flooding, and therefore there was mold growing on the walls of her apartment. Her kids were getting sick. She needed to leave. She had nowhere to go. She couldn't call in any government services because she was undocumented. And this woman who was a social worker was saying, I have just met with this person, and there's tens of thousands of people like that in the city right now. That no matter how many resources she could get to this one person, there's still thousands and thousands of people going through those same types of things. And it shows a limitation to the way in which people have traditionally think about social work. And I know that's something that's being challenged right now by all of you. It's being challenged in the department that you're in. And I think that it's being challenged here while we're having this conversation about the nature of the organizing being oriented around and a series of collective actions to make an impact on a group of people, whereas social work is oftentimes considered something that is focused on an individual and meeting individuals' needs that are struggling. And I think that this is precisely what we're challenging when we're talking about these types of collaborations, because we understand when we look at the world that we live in that the problems that we're having aren't because of our own failings. The people that you work with doing social work are not living in poverty or having health conditions or mental health conditions or what have you because they've done something wrong or they have not met the standards of the society. But these failings are really systemic. And there's great evidence of that right here in the state that we live in Texas. We have to understand that this state is an abundant, rich, a wealthy place, not only in terms of the economic money that is here, but of the diversity of culture, the length of time where people have lived in this state is well before it was part of the United States, well before it was part of Mexico, but really for tens of thousands of years, people have been living in this abundant and beautiful land. And in a short 150 years, or so, people have been able to turn this state into a really peculiar economic system. I want to talk to you briefly about this place. Everyone has potentially heard of the city of Port Arthur. This came up in conversation yesterday. I was talking to someone who's an organizer out of Port Arthur, and he was talking about the largest refinery in the world is there in Port Arthur, and it's essentially creating the most wealth of any economic machine in the world. It's refining oil. And when we look at our global economy, banks do not make money, oil makes money. All money is oil money. This is the economic engine of our country. And what's so amazing about this particular refinery, that it is in the poorest county in the country. So the richest place and the poorest place is the same place. And when you start to understand that reality, you start to understand that there's something that's really wrong with our economic system that we have here, that it is not doing right for people in a collective sense. And I think that when we start to understand that, we start to understand what do people need. And when we look at things like health, someone maybe an individual needs to go to the doctor, but when we start looking at, well, what's causing the health problems, then we start to getting these stories that Dave and Andy have been telling, where people are looking into the root causes of these problems and looking to try to stop them from happening.
Tane, are you there? Did he get dropped?
I think so.
Hold on, we'll give him a moment to see if he can get back on. I just texted him.
Honestly, that's been my issue as a Black person, like, you know, like trying to break into the field of social work, whatever that means in a formal sense, is that like the system's approach to addressing any and all of what we're talking about isn't there, or oftentimes is lost, as well as nuance and context. And so that's honestly what's on the forefront of my mind. And as I'm in a lockdown at my school right now. But yeah, so that's what I'm thinking about.
Well, we hope you're okay
Sorry,
as far as the lockdown. Oh, sorry, go.
No, that's
Oh,
okay. I dropped there. I didn't mean to cut you off there, Mark. Go ahead.
Oh no, I was just saying, Bridget, we hope you're okay. But yes, that is the issue that a lot of us have been concerned about and raising, and hopeful that all the students in here are taking this knowledge to heart and will influence their actions as far as, you know, recognizing their power as students. Remember, we pay the bills of our administrators in the university, and so when we organize and come together around common issues and propose particular solutions, then I'm hopeful that things can get a little better. But yeah, the struggle is real. All right.
Sorry about that, everyone.
Tane.
Dropping off there. And as I was saying, when we get to these stories that Andy and Dave are telling about the ways in which people have organized to stop these polluting facilities, for example, or to organize after these disasters, we start to see a different type of power emerging. This is what Andy and Dave both talked about, sort of small d democracy. Thinking about democracy in terms of people realizing or deciding who gets what, where, when, and how. In the most basic sense of like who makes decisions of whether or not you do have clean drinking water, who decides where their refineries get put, who decides what kind of economic system we have, who decides what the laws that exist are, and how that for hundreds of years now that those laws have been created to serve a very small part of the population who have been essentially creating and maintaining a system of exploitation that the majority of people have suffered from. And when we're doing this type of work, I think it needs to be not just for social workers and organizers, but not just to figure out what is bad and how to stop it. This work that a lot of what Dave and Andy are saying are just powerful stories about the way in which people suffered. I think you see a lot of that when you're doing social work. You see a lot of the immediate impacts, the real human suffering that happens there. And what we oftentimes don't get a chance to do is imagine what we actually want to replace it with. What does it look like when we are creating and maintaining a system that is equitable, that is just, that is beautiful, that works for us in all of our complexities as human beings? And I think that that is something that inspires me when I'm doing this work and when I'm doing any work. I think that it's important that when we're working with people as individuals, for example, that we tap into the dreams that they have, no matter how big these dreams are, and try to help them to realize those dreams. When we think about the lives that we are living collectively, that we don't only think of how to get through the next political cycle, how to get through the next year or 2 years, or what happens when I graduate, but what about the next 20 years? What is possible for us to do as a collective in the next 20 years? What about the next 100 years? If we look at the length of time that it took the colonial society to destroy so much of what was beautiful about the indigenous societies that lived in these lands, if we spent that amount of time, the next 100 years, trying to get it back, could we? Would it be worth it? I think it absolutely would be. And unfortunately, most of the time people think in terms of we're all going to die. There's this kind of doom of climate change or late capitalism that makes people think that, well, it's no point in even thinking what could possibly come that's better. We just got to get through this day. And that's why I think that this idea of giving people a sense of hope, a sense of purpose, a sense of belonging is so important, because it starts on the individual level for people to understand that they're part of something, that they're part of a community, that they're part of a history that isn't something that's rooted in doom or just suffering, but it's something that gets better, that gets more beautiful, and that it evolves us as human beings into something better. I think that it's really important. Andy was talking about care and how important it is to care for people. I think that we need to care for the people who are caring for others. So many of the people who seek services of social workers are women who are caring for children. What is it like to not only care for them, but tap into those wise people to see what it is that they want to create in their lives, the lives of their children, the lives of their communities, and then work with organizers to lift up those voices, to lift up those ideas, to lift up those powerful visions of what we can become as people. I see that as that it is people and people to use their voices to tap into their power to make a difference in their lives, the lives of their families, and the lives of their communities. And I hope that these kind of collaborations can continue and work deeply into the future. And I want to just say I'm really grateful for all of you to be studying this course of study, to be dedicating your lives to helping other people. It's very beautiful, and it's very inspiring that you're doing this type of work. So congratulations for all of that, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Tane. We really appreciate you being able to join us. We have 5 minutes, maybe. Feel free if you want to start your lunch, you can go ahead and start your lunch. We'll be resuming at 1, but I would like to provide at least a few minutes for anyone to ask Tane questions. And start with real quick, logistical. Did we decide, are we going to close the Zoom, or are we going to just keep it?
Yes, I am going to close the Zoom, and I'll open it up at 10 till 1 again, and I will try to have it take off the sign-in requirements so you can just pop right back on. Thank you so much to Dave and Andy and Tane for your wisdom, and also to Rocio. This has just been like a beautiful morning, and it's going to be a beautiful afternoon. And I'm going to stop talking now and let people ask questions if they have them.
And I just put it, if you are unable to attend the future workshops, you can go ahead and fill out the evaluation for what you've seen so far. And if you need any CEU credits, the information is in that survey as well.
Hi, I just wanted to make a comment. I'm a social worker at a school district. I've been doing social work for 15 years. I'm from the Rio Grande Valley. But I just want to say I appreciate having this conversation and just being able to listen in and kind of see the direction that people are taking. Because after 15 years of doing social work in the Rio Grande Valley, you see the need, you understand that there's certain things that are not changing, and we wish that we could change. But I guess because I work more like individual one-to-one, I hadn't thought about the bigger picture and where the changes can come from. So I just appreciate being a part of this conversation, just being able to listen to what you guys are doing. And I'd love to continue to be a part of this, just to listen in and kind of see where my input can help in the future.
We appreciate you and your work. Thank you for joining today and listening. Reach out anytime.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us, Ms. Cano. I wanted to just, Dave, one question I had, because the executive director of the National Association of Social Workers Texas chapter wanted to be here, but he couldn't. He had some other event, but he did want to know, he would love to be connected to any statewide policy initiatives that are going to be promoting this kind of environmental justice work. So I'll introduce you to him after, but I just wanted to see if there was anything that kind of, and I guess some of this energy democracy that you spoke about in the chat could be one of the things that he could plug into.
Yeah, honestly, y'all, the thing I put in the chat there is more for y'all. I don't think we for kind of like rank and file everyday folks, the work that we're doing is to connect folks along the analysis and lens that we talked about today, but to work to engage local utilities. If you all know anything about who you pay your water bill, your gas bill, your light bill, your electric bill, who you pay that to, you start to peel that onion back. You're like, oh wow, they're actually running a lot of fossil fuel power plants, or they give a lot of money to people who attack voting rights and reproductive healthcare access, and so on and so on. And we want to help folks connect along that learning and explore ways to organize from Brownsville and Cameron County to Denton to Houston and Port Arthur to El Paso. And so that's what that work is. But I encourage everyone in the chat, I can't copy it, Andy, it's not letting me. The people's hearing that Andy posted in the chat about is a good place for you all to like really get in the nitty-gritty of the work.
Yeah, and we're having people's hearings all over the state. We are also having one online for folks statewide. It's going to be on June 8th. I'll drop the link to it, but it will be in my slides as well if y'all want to participate. And essentially what our hearings are about is to allow folks a space to share a statement or a testimony around specifically the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, which is basically like Texas's state's EPA. And it's up for review right now, which means there's like changes that are going to be suggested and proposed, and we want to get as much public input in that process so we can get some changes made to this commission. First and foremost, one of the things that's really alarming that I found out is that our Environmental Quality Commission is the only state in the country that has like economic development basically in its mission statement. And we got to get that out of there because this isn't about that. This is about our health. So anyways, we'll drop the links. We'd love to see you there if you can participate. Your comments are important.
Thank you so much, Andy, Dave, and Tane, and all of our participants. Now is a good time to have our lunch break. We'll reopen the Zoom at around 12:55, and we'll try to start around on time, but we'll probably inevitably be a few minutes behind just to give people the chance to get in. But yeah, thanks everyone so much for being here.
Right on, y'all. Be good. Good health. Peace.
All right. Thanks, Dave. Thanks, Andy.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Tane.
Happy Earth Day.
Happy Earth
Happy Earth
Day.
Day.
La lucha sigue.